people are going to think that, with Cobb now being a free agent, he's going to they can replace him with Cobb. I don't think that's the proper thing to do. I think Cobb is still really young. I mean, age-wise, 23, 22. And, he bounced back after he had an injury against Baltimore last year and hurt his knee and was out, broke his leg, I think. And came back and didn't play as much during late in the season, especially in their loss against San Francisco at home in the playoffs. But, this year, you look at the numbers he put up and what he became. Nelson kind of disappeared late in the year or even in the playoffs to a degree, and Cobb stepped up. Adams probably has another couple years for still to develop. It's a complex offense. It takes a while for to gain Aaron Rodgers' trust and to ask him to, be the man number 2 to Nelson next year. I think that's just a knee-jerk reaction. I don't think he's ready for that, but I think he can flourish in the number 3 role for sure.
So you're saying, if I'm hearing you right here, Green Bay Packers, Randall Cobb, pay the man. Is that what you're saying?
Easily. It's, it's kind of a no-brainer. If you're looking at the list of free agents that they have on their own team, and everybody knows that Thompson pays his own guys. That he finds valuable. Now, I think you look at him as, for sure, he's the bullet. He's the one that they're going to have to pay. And then you look at Balaga, B.J. Raji, who was lost to a torn biceps before the season. He's up on that list. Do you sign him or let LaTroy Guion, who stepped up in his as his replacement? But I think Raji could be, he's the number 3. But for sure, you've got to pay Cobb. He's got Rodgers' trust. He's a big-time player. He does things from the slot and the outside. He did return some punts and kicks this year, but eventually they're going to have to get a kick and punt returner as well, somebody who can do that, because you're asking a lot of Micah Hyde, who sees more time in the defense now as a slot corner, a nickel dime guy, and I think you've got to find a returner. Now that could be Jared Abbrederis from Wisconsin that they drafted in the 5th round last year. Jeff Janis, 7th round wide receiver from one of the Michigan schools. I apologize, I can't think which one. No, I'm sorry, Saginaw Valley State. He was a Division II kid. So they've got those two potentially could be somebody on the roster who could become the returner, so Cobb and Hyde don't have to deal with that. DeJuan Harris did nothing as a kick returner except for, he wasn't, taking touchbacks. He was running maybe to the 18-yard line, and that was about it. So I think right now that Cobb's got to be the top one, and then, if you don't find somebody on the roster that can be the returner, that's something that they got to look in the draft. Not first round, but high.
You bring up something that I have to admit drives me absolutely nuts, and that's having some of your best players, such as wide receivers, like a Randall Cobb, a Percy Harvin, a Julian Edelman, and putting them in a situation like punt returning or kick returning where they could absolutely get creamed. And I agree with you there. That I think has to be at the top of their list. I want to sort of fast forward up to now more recent news and more recent times, this NFC Championship game against the Seahawks. I thought you wrote a tremendously good article that gave the Packers perspective in this game and certainly tipped your hat to the Seahawks, who did some amazing things. But from a Green Bay Packers perspective, tell the listeners out there what happened.
In my opinion, and as I wrote on the Fantasy Greek, is I think it was a very weak game plan offensively by McCarthy. I think that, I don't question Mike McCarthy's done a fabulous job with the Packers. I think sometimes he tries to outthink himself. I thought as I said in the post, that you don't use the term playing scared with an offense like Green Bay. I just think it was so ultra conservative that it just took away from putting the Seahawks away. And when you get the Seahawks on the ropes you need to put him away, and he did not do that. In the red zone 2 or 3 times, one was an interception to Sherman to Richard Sherman in the first series, and then he went totally away from Richard Sherman the rest of the game. And when Richard Sherman, I think he dislocated his elbow, especially on that last series. If you go back to the last, not the very last series where Rodgers let him down to a field goal to tie it to take it into overtime, but the one before that when they're trying to eat the clock away. 3rd down, and I think they ran the ball all 3 downs, and then took the ball out of Rodgers' hands. Now, I understand Rodgers is hobbled, but man, you've got probably the best quarterback in the league, arguably, and you run the ball all 3 downs. I'll take my chance on 3rd down, Aaron Rodgers throwing that. And it just, I think his game plan, and Rodgers questioned it, the play calling being conservative, and I think in the end, I mean, you got only 6 points off of, 5 turnovers, 4 interceptions by Wilson, a fumble by Baldwin on a kick return, and you get 6 points. You got to do more against a team like Seattle. And their offensive line, who I think, I mean, obviously Rodgers would get my vote for MVP of the league, but the MVP for the Packers, to me, was the offensive line. And they just, I don't know. I think they wasted a good offensive output by the offensive line. They only gave up 1 sack that day against a very powerful, fast pass rush of the Seahawks. And to me, if you want to look, people are going to point to Brandon Bostic not recovering the onside kick, which, he either needed to get out of the way because Jordy Nelson was right behind him, or he needs to catch the ball. There's no doubt about it. But he should never have been put in that situation. The Packers should have been, kneeling down by that time because the game should have been long over, to be totally honest, or in a decent lead that the game was already in hand. And I think that, I find it funny that McCarthy came out and said we weren't aggressive enough on offense. Well, when you're the play caller and the head coach, that kind of falls on your shoulders. And that was, to me, people might disagree that now you got to take the points when you can. Well, to a degree, maybe on that first drive or that first time they scored when they're on the 1 yard line, but you get it on the 1 yard line again and you kick a 19-yard field. I just didn't care for it. I didn't think it was the right thing from an outside standpoint of view, but it just was very conservative, and I think in the end that it cost them the game.
You are listening to Late Night Sports Radio in the Fantasy Greeks NFL Football Power Hour, coming to you live from various parts of the United States. Jim, you had some criticism there for the Packers in this NFC Championship game, and some of it's well-deserved. It doesn't mean that, heads are going to roll over there in Green Bay. I mean, it's just too good of a team to necessarily change things drastically. But if you're Ted Thompson, you're the general manager of the Green Bay Packers. If there's any changes or a change that you think should be seriously considered by the team, what do you think it should be?
If you followed my posts on thefantasygreek.com, that you know that there's one thing that needs to be changed and changed immediately, and I wrote about it, said that it would cost them a game eventually, and they need to correct it before they win in the playoffs, and that's special teams. I mean, a fake field goal for a touchdown, botched onside kick, 4 or 5 block kicks and punts during the year. You look at their special teams coordinator, Sean Slocum, who it's not just one season that the special teams have been bad. I think 4 years he's run the special teams, and he's not got the job done. And, it's just, you've got to make a change. I mean, that's the reason one of the reasons when McCarthy made the change from a 4-3 to a 3-4 and brought in Capers was to improve their special teams with more athletic outside linebackers to play special teams, and did that, and not much has improved. And it's time to make a move. It's, a different voice. I mean, last season they let go their assistant special teams coach, Chad Morton, whose brother Johnny played in the league, and so did Chad, and brought in Ron Zook, longtime college coach to Illinois and Florida, and to give Slocum another voice. And I just don't think the leadership is, you got the right guy leading that unit. And I mean, it cost him. I mean, I think Tim Mastay took a step back punting the ball, and Crosby bounced back, but he did have some blocked field goals. So, I mean, something's wrong there. And I know McCarthy he's let a few of his assistants go over his tenure, but I don't see how you don't make a move on special teams. If it's either, let Slocum go and give Zook the job, or you bring in a new voice. Now, personally, I think you bring in a new voice and just start over and try to find somebody who knows what's going on and make the correct change.
Jim, before we head into our first break of the show, I just wanted to ask you about a couple of the free agents for the Green Bay Packers, and certainly if you're not, if you don't have an opinion at this time, I mean, free agency starts on March 10th, so we've got some time.
It'd be very rare that I don't have an opinion. So,
well, I think we're getting a good sense of that, by the way.
Yeah, I'll tell you how I feel. So,
how about B.J. Raji?
I'm all for bringing him back. I think that you could probably get him on the cheap, probably another 1-year deal like he had before he tore his bicep. I mean, that's why, when they came back, he was on a 1-year deal, didn't get much interest out. I'm going with Josh Boyd in the middle, and you need kind of a bigger body in a 3-4. Well, you do need a bigger body in 3-4 to have them eat up blockers and allow your linebackers to make plays. So I think Raji, I think I would strongly think that they would bring him back. Especially, I think they're going to get a deal on him coming off an injury, and the year before he got injured, he was he didn't do much. So I can't imagine he's going to demand a lot of interest in the open market, and I think bringing him back on the cheap would be the right thing to do.
What about Tramon Williams and Devon House? Quickly, what do you think about those guys?
Very easy. I think that Devon House is a big, he against some of the other bigger wide receivers in the league, he did a nice job. I know he had the most, surprisingly, when Julio Jones had his big day against Green Bay. He actually was the one that had the best luck. I don't think he's going to come back. I really don't. I think he's going to get more interest out of anybody looking for a cornerback. And unfortunately, I think he's going to be lost in numbers for Green Bay, because I think Tramon Williams showed that he bounced back after having a shoulder problem 3 seasons ago. And I know Thompson doesn't like, veterans that are getting long in the tooth, but he proved he can still play, and he played really well opposite Sam Shields now. And then they still have Shields, Williams, Micah Hyde made a big step. Casey Hayward played, he was lost last year to a hamstring, so he played really well in the nickel. So I think House will probably be lost in free agency, and I think Williams will come back.
He's Jim Widener. I'm Jim Saranteas. Jim, thank you so much for spending part of your Wednesday evening with us tonight. Ladies and gentlemen out there, you can catch Jim Widener on thefantasygreek.com. I'm going to guess, based on my experience with Jim, he'll be probably posting stuff once a week, once every 2 weeks. Check out the homepage on the Fantasy Greek for the Green Bay Packers. Jim, you're always welcome to hang out. We've got Ben Franklin coming on from thefantasygreek.com to talk about the Cowboys. But again, thank you so much for everything.
You bet. Thanks for having me on. It was a pleasure.
We'll be back in 5 or 10. Take us away, Keith.
Second to keep breathing in a moment before it's gone. You never know when love is lost until you find just what it costs to be in